Hi everyone, welcome to Smart Math Online Tutor. Through this video, we are going to look into histograms. To get started, let's learn about limits and boundaries of a class interval. When a class interval is given along with the frequencies, the first part of the interval is called the upper limit, whereas the second part of the interval is called the lower limit. Now, when we draw histograms, the lower limit of the first class interval and the upper limit of the second class interval must be same. But now in this case, you can see it is 134 and 135, or it's 139 and 140 when you come to the next two class intervals. So, in order to make these two intervals, the limits same, we have to follow this procedure. What we do is, we take the class boundary, that is the lower limit of the first interval and the upper limit of the second interval is added and divided by 2. Then you get 134.5. So likewise, you have to find out the class boundaries of each class interval and make the respective table like this in order to draw the histogram. So this is a very important step you have to follow before drawing the histograms. And then let us see what is a histogram and how to draw it. So before you draw a histogram, you should remember certain facts. That is, always the class intervals or the class boundaries must be marked on the x-axis taking an appropriate scale. And then the frequency of the distribution is generally marked on the y-axis. The next thing is, unlike in column graphs, in histograms, we do not leave gaps between the columns. So all the columns will be touching one another. No gaps must be left. And the next important thing is that area of the column is always equal to the frequency of the interval. So that is a very important property of a histogram. Area of the column must be equal to the frequency of that particular class interval. Now let us see how to draw a histogram looking into an example. Here, frequency distribution prepared from the data obtained regarding the number of books sold at a bookshop is given. So we have to illustrate this information in a histogram. Now you can see clearly the number of books represent the class intervals and the number of days is the frequency here. So you can see the class intervals, I put it into a table like this. Here the upper limit, the lower limit of the first interval and the upper limit of the second interval are not same. It's 29 and 30. Therefore, we have to make the limits same. For that, we have to take the class boundaries. So I add 29 and 30 and divide by 2, we get 29.5. When you come to the second part, it is 34 plus 35 divided by 2, 34.5. When you do this division, you will see there is a pattern. So by following the pattern, you can take the class boundaries like this. Okay. And then frequency, you can fill it as it is. And now let us see with this information how to draw the histogram. So here I have taken the table to a side. X-axis and y-axis must be marked like this. X-axis is number of books, y-axis is number of days. And if you say this part, now here from 0 to 24.5, the gap is contracted, right? So in order to show that the gap is contracted, I have marked this sign at the beginning of the x-axis. So you should remember it shows the contracted gap. Then I mark the columns like this according to the frequency. It's 5 for the first class interval, 10 for the second class interval, 20 for the third one, 15 for the fourth one, 10 and 7. So it is very simple. You can simply mark the columns and shade them like this. So very important thing in this case is you should not leave gaps in between columns. Let's look into another example. Frequency distribution prepared from the data obtained regarding the number of telephone calls and the duration is below. So this also we are going to illustrate in a histogram. Now in this case you can see in the class intervals, the lower limit of the first class interval and the upper limit of the second class interval is same. Now in such an instance, we no need to bother about the class boundaries. We can directly draw the histogram, right? So then let me draw the x-axis and the y-axis. So here the duration and the number of calls are marked in the x and y axis respectively. And then let's mark the first column. It is 8. The second one is 9. Third one is 12. 16. And when you come to this the last class interval, there is a difference. Now if you take this class interval, it is the class size is 75 minus 60, it is 15. Right, the gap between 60 and 75 is 15. But take the last class interval, there the class size is 120 minus 90, that is 30. Now you can see the class size varies. It is twice the previous class size. So in this case, 30 is twice 15. Therefore, if the class size is greater than the previous class sizes, you have to divide the frequency by 2, because now here we are dividing it by 2 because 30 is twice 15. In case if it was thrice, you have to divide by 3, or if it was 4 times, you have to divide by 4. So here when you divide the frequency by 2, you get 4. Therefore in the next part, the height of the column must be 4, right, not 8. So you have to divide it by 2 and mark it like this. Now in this case you can see now the height is 4. Then the number of units in the breadth side is 2. So 2 into 4, 8. Right. So you are getting 8 in that case like this. 2 into 4 is 8. So here we are maintaining the area is equal to the frequency. That is the first, in the first part of the session I told you about it. Area of the column must be equal to the frequency. So here we have maintained that. Then we will move on to the next part, that is frequency polygon. So when you draw a frequency polygon, you can follow 2 methods. You can use the frequency distribution or the mid value of frequencies of each class interval. So here, look at this frequency distribution. I have already drawn the histogram. In order to draw the frequency polygon, you have to mark the midpoint on each class interval like this, right? So each class interval you have to mark the midpoints like this, and then on either sides of the histogram you have to mark the midpoints on the x-axis. We do this in order to maintain the area of the frequency polygon and the area of the histogram must be the same. So in order to maintain this equality, we take half from the previous class intervals on either sides of the histogram, and then we join the midpoints like this. So this figure you get after joining the midpoints is called the frequency polygon. This is very simple. All what you have to do is to mark the midpoints of each class interval and join them. And when it comes to the class intervals on either sides of the histogram, you have to mark half of them and join the polygon like this. Let's look into another example. This is our example 4. Here too you have the same story. The histogram is already drawn. You have to mark the midpoints like this, and then you have to join the midpoints like this. Now when it comes to the column here, the last part, there are midpoints of each class interval you have to mark separately. Now from 90 to 105 you have to mark the midpoint. From 105 to 120 also you have to mark the midpoint and mark it like this. Otherwise your answer will be wrong. So here this is your frequency polygon for this distribution. A frequency polygon can be marked using the midpoints only without drawing the histogram. Now like this, now already here I have taken the histogram I drew. You can mark the midpoints. Without the histogram, you can join them like this. So still this is also correct as when it comes to the frequency polygons. So hope I made myself clear about histograms and how to draw them, and also about frequency polygons. See you with another smart math clip. Until then, goodbye.